Welcome back into the Cannes 2023 Parallel Challenge here on Fantasy Film Ball. We're your hosts, Matt and Arnaud.
That means we are watching an equivalent film to all 21 competition titles at Cannes this year. So in this video, we're going to be tackling Replay and Homecoming by French director Catherine Corsini. Catherine Corsini has been working since the 80s. She's worked in a lot of television as an actress too. Her fourth film, Replay, which is the one we'll be talking about, was in Cannes competition. It was her first film in Cannes competition. She also came to Cannes in 2013 in the Un Certain Regard sidebar, and in 2021 with The Divide, which apparently Spike Lee really loved. He gave a standing ovation to. The film won nothing. So she's there for the fourth time this year with Homecoming, and she's received recent accusations of unethical filming conditions and just all around being a bad person. We're gonna try to judge these works fairly, but of course we're going to keep this in the back of our heads. We chose Replay in particular to see what her Cannes debut was like and to see if she showed promise.
Pretty interesting because the last film we talked about, we just released a video on Hirokazu Koreeda's Distance, which also played in Cannes competition in 2001. So we're doing back-to-back Cannes competition 2001 films. So let's talk about Replay. It's a very simple film. There's not a whole lot going on here in terms of plot. This is a story about an on and off friendship between two actresses, Natalie and Louise. Sometimes they're friends, sometimes they lean closer to lovers, it seems, although neither will really admit this. The two clearly have unspoken feelings for each other, perhaps unrequited on Natalie's end. Natalie basically spends the entire time taking advantage of and walking all over Louise, and the film is really just about this toxic relationship between these two women.
Following in the footsteps of The Divide not nearly being as good of a translation to The Fracture, which is the French title of the film. This film, the French title is La Répétition, which would be The Rehearsal, which I think is a far better title given that,
yes.
It is a theater rehearsal, but it's also a rehearsal of not actually doing the real thing within themselves in their relationship. Either way, just to give a little bit of context to this film, you have two stars here which form the package of the film are Pascal Bussière and Emmanuel Béat. In 2001, this is a big deal. Having Pascal Bussière, which is one of the biggest names in Quebec. She just came off of Denis Villeneuve's first film. And Emmanuel Béat just being all around a really big star in France. I think that was a big reason why this film was in Cannes competition. So yeah, there's an interesting dynamic at play here. And the film doesn't always go into cliches, which I appreciate. There's a subtle toxicity looming beneath, and that kind of makes the dynamic between these characters much more interesting. But to me, the biggest problem of this film is the pace and the craft. To me, it shows that Corsini came from TV movies, not in its production necessarily, but just in the way this thing is cut. This thing goes at a rapid pace, and usually I would say that as a good thing, but here things go so fast. This film is only 90-ish minutes long that you never have a time to actually pause and think, and that's the film's biggest flaw. There's maybe one or two scenes I can remember where I was like, oh, this is interesting, I'm actually seeing them do something. You don't actually get to feel anything because things just happen and you're already out of it by the time the film is done.
It's a film where it doesn't feel like a whole lot happens, and the characters and situations aren't really layered or complex enough to leave us thinking about it afterwards, or maybe the film just doesn't give us the time to think about these things throughout. That said, I did quite enjoy myself while watching it, but I kind of struggled to remember details about the film just a week after watching.
It's funny because The Divide, which I know we haven't seen yet, but I can speak to, was another film that was kind of stylistically unambitious. That's not something I necessarily, use to denigrate a film, but, at least in this film, there were funny and dramatic moments, especially the ending. I get the sense after seeing these two films that Corsini is, at least to me, a really uninteresting filmmaker, and her films are only as good as the scripts that she either writes or receives.
I got the same vibe from her previous film, Summertime, which I know a lot of people really do love. That was one I watched a few years ago, and it just really didn't leave much of an impression on me. But that said, it is possible that we're just not the intended audience to really connect with the emotions going on in these films. These are very sapphic, queer-coded films, specifically for queer women. But that said, I agree. I just don't get a lot out of her films.
So let's talk about her new film, Homecoming, which before we actually talk about the film, I just want to quickly go over the controversy, the behind-the-scenes controversy and accusations. Allegedly, Corsini and her team filmed an unsimulated and off-script self-masturbation scene with a 15-year-old first-time actress. Generally, just there not being great set etiquette when filming this last film. There's also just kind of general accusations or allegations of bullying. Some of her funding from the CNC, which is a funding body in France, is currently frozen until they complete their investigation. If she is found to having broken guild rules, essentially, she could just lose some of the funding for this film. Corsini denies all of this, but let's just say that at least the bullying accusations are starting to get well known. Corsini does not have the best reputation as a nice person.
This is the type of French film that we always see in competition that always goes home empty-handed. It's almost like this type of film is in by obligation. As Cannes is a French film festival, they have to show French films. Remember when people really thought The Divide had prize potential because Spike Lee gave it that standing ovation, and then it went home empty-handed? If that happened and Spike Lee loved that movie so much, I just don't see Homecoming getting anything.
As far as the content of the film, this is gonna be, I think a better comparison would be Mother and Son from last year. I will also make another comparison from last year, which is Tchaikovsky's Wife. Both films premiered on the very first day of the festivals. They were both easily the most controversial film of the competition lineup, not particularly for the content of their film, but more so for things in the background. Tchaikovsky's Wife was controversial more so because it was the only, it was a Russian film, so of course that caused some controversy. And I think in both cases, Cannes is programming these films on the very first day so that, you know, they're going to be talked about inevitably a little bit, and then after day 2, 3, 4, we're moving on, and we don't have to think about it anymore.
And they clearly don't think that the controversy is going to be too bad, because they did pass on the Woody Allen film for the reason of they didn't want the controversy of that film. So I think that it's very possible that this film is actually quite good despite the controversy. That said, I just think it's gross. I have to agree with you. I think this film is going empty-handed. That first day slot is never very promising when it comes to films receiving awards at the very end of the festival. But anyways, thank you so much for joining us on our Cannes Film Festival Parallel Challenge. Make sure you subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of the films. We're going to be watching a parallel film for all 21 films in competition, so make sure you stay tuned to figure out who is going to be our Palme d'Or.